The wind howled through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying with it the bitter cold of another Wyoming winter. Margaret stood by the small window of her cabin, watching the gray sky promise more snow. Her hands trembled, not from the cold but from fear. Behind her, 3 small faces looked up at her with eyes too big for their thin faces. "Mama, I'm hungry," whispered little Rose, the youngest at just 2 years old. Her voice was so soft, so weak, that it broke Margaret's heart into even smaller pieces. "I know, sweetheart. Mama will find something," she said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. But when she opened the cupboard, she found what she already knew was there. Almost nothing. A handful of flour, some dried beans that wouldn't be enough for even one proper meal. The reality hit her like a punch to the stomach. 6 months. It had been 6 months since her husband Thomas died. The pneumonia had taken him so fast she barely had time to understand what was happening. 1 week he was coughing, the next week he was gone. Just like that, she became a widow at 27, alone with 3 children in the middle of nowhere. Thomas had been everything. The strong one, the one who knew how to fix things, how to hunt, how to make the farm work. Without him, Margaret felt like a ship without a sail, just drifting and sinking slowly. She tried her best. God knows she tried. She attempted to tend the small vegetable garden, but the early frost killed everything. She tried to keep the 2 cows alive, but without proper feed, one died and she had to sell the other just to buy flour that was now almost gone. Her oldest, Timothy, was only 8 years old, but he tried to be the man of the house. She watched him struggle to chop wood with an axe too heavy for his small arms. He never complained, but she saw how his hands blistered and bled. Her middle child, Beth, was 5 and still didn't fully understand why Papa wasn't coming back. She kept asking when he would return from his trip. Every time she asked, Margaret's heart shattered a little more. The neighbors had helped at first. They brought food, offered kind words, but they had their own families to feed, their own troubles. The visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Margaret understood. She didn't blame them. Everyone was just trying to survive. She looked at her children again. Timothy's clothes hung loose on his frame. Beth's cheeks, once round and rosy, were now hollow, and little Rose, she barely had the energy to play anymore. They were starving. Slowly but surely they were starving, and Margaret felt completely powerless to stop it. That night, after putting the children to bed with nothing but weak bean soup in their bellies, Margaret sat alone in the darkness. She thought about things no mother should ever have to think about. What would happen if she couldn't feed them? Would they all freeze to death in this cabin? Would someone find them in spring, 4 bodies huddled together? No, she couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. But what choice did she have? She had no money, no food, no family nearby who could help. Her parents were dead. Thomas's family lived back east and hadn't even responded to her letter about his death. She was truly, completely alone. That's when the thought came to her. The terrible, heartbreaking thought that made her sob into her hands. Maybe her children would have a better chance without her. Maybe if she could find good families to take them, they would survive. They would eat. They would grow up. They would live. Even if it meant she would never see them again, the thought tortured her all night. How could a mother give away her children? What kind of woman would do such a thing? But what kind of mother would watch her babies starve when there might be another way? By morning, she had made her decision. She hated herself for it, but she had made it. If anyone came by, anyone at all, she would beg them to take her children to town, to find them homes, to give them a chance at life. 3 days passed. Nobody came. The isolation of their homestead, once a source of peace, now felt like a prison. Margaret's hope began to fade. Maybe nobody would come. Maybe this was how it would end. Then, on the 4th day, she heard it, the sound of a horse. Her heart jumped. She rushed to the window and saw him, a man on horseback leading a pack mule behind him. He was dressed like a ranch hand with worn leather chaps and a dusty hat. He looked tired, weathered by years of hard work and sun. Margaret's hands shook as she grabbed her shawl. This was it. This was the moment. She had to be brave. She had to do this for her children. She stepped outside into the cold, her breath making clouds in the freezing air. The man had stopped near her well, letting his horse drink. He looked up as she approached, touching the brim of his hat politely. He appeared to be in his 30s, with a lined face that spoke of a hard life but kind eyes that gave her a small spark of hope. "Ma'am," he said simply, "hope you don't mind." My horse needed water. No, of course not, Margaret replied, her voice shaking. Please help yourself. He studied her for a moment, and she knew what he was seeing. A woman too thin, with dark circles under her eyes and desperation written all over her face. She probably looked like a ghost. You all right, ma'am? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. That simple question, that small kindness, broke something inside her. Tears started falling before she could stop them. No, she whispered. No, I'm not all right. The man dismounted quickly, looking uncomfortable but concerned. What's wrong? Are you hurt, sick? Margaret shook her head, trying to find the words. How do you ask someone to take your children? How do you form those words? She looked back at the cabin where 3 little faces were now pressed against the window, watching. I'm a widow, she began, her voice breaking. My husband died 6 months ago. I have 3 children, 3 beautiful children, and I can't feed them. I've tried everything. I have nothing left. Nothing. The man's expression changed to one of deep sympathy. He looked at the cabin, at the children in the window, then back at her. Please, Margaret said. And then she did something she never thought she would do. She fell to her knees in the snow, looking up at this stranger with tears streaming down her face. Please take my children. Take them to town. Find them families who can feed them, who can give them a life. I'm begging you. Please don't let them starve. The cowboy stood frozen, clearly shocked by her plea. The wind blew between them, carrying snowflakes that caught in Margaret's hair. Everything seemed to stop. The whole world held its breath, waiting for his answer. Margaret's heart pounded as she waited, knowing that whatever this stranger said next would determine if her children lived or died. The cowboy stared at Margaret kneeling in the snow, his face showing shock and something else, something deeper. Pain, maybe, or memory. He quickly stepped forward and gently helped her to her feet. Ma'am, please get up. Don't kneel like that, he said softly. His hands were rough, but his touch was gentle. Let's talk proper. Margaret stood swaying slightly from weakness and emotion. She couldn't read his face. Was he angry? Disgusted? Would he just ride away and leave them to their fate? What's your name? He asked. Margaret. Margaret Chen, she answered, wiping her tears with trembling hands. I'm Robert, he said. Robert Hayes. He looked at the cabin again, at those 3 small faces still pressed against the window. How old are your children? Timothy is 8. Beth is 5. Rose just turned 2, Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. Each name felt like a knife in her heart. Robert was quiet for a long moment. He removed his hat and ran his hand through his dark hair, clearly thinking hard. And you have no family? Nobody who can help? No one. We're completely alone. Margaret felt fresh tears coming, but forced them back. She had to be strong. Had to convince the stranger to save her babies. I know what I'm asking is terrible. I know what kind of mother it makes me seem like. But they're dying. Slowly dying right in front of me, and I can't watch that happen. Listen, Robert said, putting his hat back on. I can't just take your children and dump them in some orphanage or with strangers. That ain't right. Margaret's heart sank. He was going to refuse. He was going to leave them. Please, she started to beg again, but he held up his hand. I ain't finished, he said. I said I can't take just your children, but I can take all of you. Margaret blinked, certain she had heard wrong. What? You heard me right. I'll take you all. The whole family. Robert shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. I work at a big cattle ranch about 50 miles north of here. The Double R Ranch. The owner, Mr. Reynolds, he's always looking for help. His wife runs the kitchen for all the ranch hands, and she's been complaining about needing help for months now. I don't understand, Margaret said, her mind spinning. You're offering me a job? Us a home? That's exactly what I'm offering. Robert's face was serious. Can you cook? Do kitchen work? Yes, I can cook. I'm a good cook, or at least I was when I had food to cook with, Margaret said. A tiny spark of hope beginning to grow in her chest. Then there you go. Mrs. Reynolds needs kitchen help. You need a job and a place to stay. Your children need food. Seems like it could work out for everyone. He made it sound so simple, but Margaret's mind was filled with questions and doubts. But why? She asked. Why would you do this for strangers? You don't know us. We could be, I don't know, criminals or something. Robert smiled sadly. You ain't criminals. You're a desperate mother trying to save her children. I understand that more than you know. His smile faded, and Margaret saw deep sadness in his eyes. I had a family once. A wife named Caroline. A baby daughter, Anna. He paused, looking off at the horizon. Fever took them both 5 years ago. 1 week they were fine. The next week they were gone. Just like that, I was alone. His voice got quieter. I know what it's like to lose everything. To feel like there's no point in going on. I've been drifting from ranch to ranch ever since. Never staying long anywhere. Never letting myself care too much about anything or anyone. Margaret felt her throat tighten with emotion. This man understood loss. Real, deep loss. When I saw you kneeling there in the snow begging for your children's lives, Robert continued, I saw Caroline. I saw what she would have done if she'd lived and I'd died. She would have done anything, sacrificed anything to save our daughter. You remind me that there's still good in this world, still people worth fighting for. I don't know what to say, Margaret whispered. Say you'll come. Say you'll let me help. Robert's voice was firm now. I ain't asking for anything in return except honest work. Mrs. Reynolds will pay you fair wages. You'll have a cabin to live in. Your children will eat 3 meals a day. Timothy's old enough to start learning ranch work if he wants. The girls can help around the place or just be children for once. Margaret wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe him. But years of hardship had taught her to be cautious. What if Mr. Reynolds doesn't want us? What if we get there and he sends us away? He won't, Robert said confidently. First, because I'm going to vouch for you. Second, because when Mrs. Reynolds sees those hungry children, wild horses couldn't drag her away from helping. She's got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. Trust me on this, but I'm a stranger to you. You're taking such a risk, Margaret said. Life's a risk, Robert replied with a shrug. Besides, something my Caroline used to say keeps running through my head. She always said that angels show up in our lives disguised as people who need help. Maybe by helping you, I'm helping myself too. Maybe I need this as much as you do. Margaret looked back at her cabin, at her 3 children still watching from the window. They looked so small, so fragile. What choice did she really have? Stay here and watch them slowly starve? Or trust this stranger who seemed to be offering them a miracle? When would we leave? She asked quietly. First light tomorrow, Robert said. That'll give you time to pack what you can carry. I've got a supply wagon I can clear out. The children can ride in the back. It's about a 3-day journey. 3 days. In 3 days, her children could be safe, warm, fed. In 3 days, everything could change. Or it could all be a terrible mistake. But what was the alternative? Okay, Margaret said, the word coming out like a prayer. Okay, we'll come with you. Robert nodded, a small smile crossing his weathered face. Good, that's real good. Now I'm betting you don't have much food in that cabin. Am I right? Margaret felt shame wash over her, but she nodded. Don't look like that, Robert said gently. Ain't nothing to be ashamed of here. He walked to his pack mule and pulled out a cloth sack. I've got some dried beef, some bread, and some apples. It ain't fancy, but it'll feed your family tonight and tomorrow morning. He handed her the sack and Margaret took it with shaking hands. She looked inside and saw more food than her children had seen in weeks. Tears started falling again. But this time they were different. These weren't tears of despair. These were tears of relief, of hope, of overwhelming gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Robert said, but his voice was kind. Save your thanks for when we get you safely to the ranch. For now, go feed those babies of yours. I'll camp nearby tonight and we'll head out at sunrise. Margaret clutched the sack of food to her chest and ran back to the cabin. When she burst through the door, 3 pairs of eyes looked at her with curiosity and hope. Mama, why were you crying? Beth asked. Because sometimes miracles happen, sweetheart, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. Sometimes when everything seems darkest, someone comes along and lights a candle. Now who's hungry? The children's faces lit up like the sun breaking through storm clouds. As Margaret prepared the first real meal they'd had in days, she kept glancing out the window at Robert setting up his camp. Who was this man really? Why was he helping them? Could she truly trust him? She didn't have answers to these questions. But as she watched her children eat with genuine appetite for the first time in weeks, as she saw color return to their cheeks and light return to their eyes, she made a decision. She would trust him. She would take this chance. Because sometimes when you're drowning, you have to grab the hand that reaches out to you, even if you don't know who it belongs to. Tomorrow, they would begin a new journey. Tomorrow, everything would change. Margaret didn't know what waited for them at the Double R Ranch. She didn't know if this would work out or end in disaster. But for the first time in 6 long months, she had hope. and sometimes hope is all you need to take the next step forward. The sun was setting as they approached the main ranch house, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Margaret's stomach churned with nervousness. Everything depended on the next few minutes. What if the ranch owner took one look at her and her children and sent them away? What if Robert had been wrong about Mrs. Reynolds' kindness? Several ranch hands stopped their work to watch the wagon roll in. Margaret could feel their curious stares. She tried to sit up straighter to look capable and strong, even though she felt like she might fall apart. The main house was bigger than she'd expected, a 2-story building with a wide porch and real glass windows. As they pulled up, the front door opened and 2 people stepped out. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his 50s, with gray streaking through his brown hair and a beard. He had the look of someone who'd spent his whole life working hard and wasn't afraid of much. This had to be Mr. Reynolds. The woman beside him was shorter, rounder, with kind eyes and graying blonde hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a simple dress with an apron, and her face showed immediate concern when she saw the children. "Hayes," Mr. Reynolds called out, his voice deep and commanding. "Wasn't expecting you back for another 2 days. What's all this?" Robert dismounted and walked over to them. Margaret couldn't hear what he was saying, but she saw him speaking earnestly, gesturing toward the wagon. Mr. Reynolds' expression was hard to read, but Mrs. Reynolds' face showed clear concern and sympathy. After what felt like forever, Robert turned and waved Margaret over. "Come on down. Bring the children." Margaret's legs shook as she climbed out of the wagon. She lifted Rose down, then helped Beth. Timothy jumped down on his own, trying to look brave despite his obvious nervousness. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds," Robert said. "This is Margaret Chen and her children, Timothy, Beth, and Rose." Mrs. Reynolds stepped forward immediately, her eyes sweeping over the children with a practiced, motherly assessment. Margaret saw the exact moment when the woman noticed how thin they were, how their clothes hung loose, how their eyes were too big for their faces. Mrs. Reynolds' hand went to her heart. "Oh, you poor darlings," she said softly. Then louder to her husband, "Henry, look at these babies. They're half-starved." Mr. Reynolds' stern expression softened slightly. "I can see that, Martha." He turned to Robert. "Hayes, explain this situation properly." Robert did, telling them everything. About finding Margaret ready to give up her children rather than watch them starve. About her husband's death and her isolation. About the failed farm and the brutal winter. As he spoke, Margaret kept her eyes down, shame burning in her cheeks. When Robert finished, there was a long silence. Margaret's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. This was it, the moment when they'd either be saved or sent away. "Mrs. Chen," Mr. Reynolds said finally, and his voice wasn't unkind, but it was serious. "What Robert's suggesting, taking you on as kitchen help, that's a business decision. I need to know you can do the work. Can you cook for 30 men? Can you handle the heat and the hours and the pressure?" Margaret lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, sir, I can. I was raised on a farm and cooked for large groups since I was 12. I'm a hard worker and I don't complain. I'll earn my keep, I promise you that." Mr. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. "And your children? The little ones can't work. Who'll watch them while you're in the kitchen?" "I will," Margaret said quickly. "I'll work whatever hours you need and I'll care for my children. They won't be a burden." "Now hold on," Mrs. Reynolds interrupted, stepping forward. "Those babies aren't a burden, Henry Reynolds, and I won't hear such talk. Look at them. They need care and feeding and love, and that's exactly what they'll get. Martha, we can't take in every stray that shows up on our doorstep," Mr. Reynolds said. But his tone was gentler now. "These aren't strays, they're people. A family." Mrs. Reynolds' voice was firm. "And I've been begging you for help in that kitchen for 6 months now. You know I can't handle it all alone anymore. My back's giving out, my knees hurt, and I'm not getting any younger. We could hire anyone to help in the kitchen," Mr. Reynolds pointed out. "Could we? Where?" Mrs. Reynolds spread her hands. "We're 50 miles from the nearest town. Nobody wants to come work out here in the middle of nowhere. And here's a perfectly good cook standing right in front of you and you're arguing about it." A small smile tugged at Mr. Reynolds' mouth. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Not a chance," Mrs. Reynolds said firmly. Then she turned to Margaret. "When did these children last eat a proper meal?" "This morning," Margaret said. "Robert's been feeding us on the journey. Before that—" She paused, not wanting to say. "Before that, they were starving," Mrs. Reynolds finished grimly. She looked at her husband. I'm taking them inside. I'm going to feed them. Then I'm going to give them baths and put them to bed in the spare room. You can make your business decisions tomorrow. Tonight these babies need care." Mr. Reynolds sighed, but he was smiling now. "Fine, you win like you always do. We'll try it out for a month. See how it goes." A month? Margaret's heart sank. A month wasn't long enough to save any money or make real plans. But Mrs. Reynolds was beaming. "Don't you worry, dear. Once Henry sees how hard you work, that month will turn permanent. Now come on, all of you. Let's get you inside where it's warm." The inside of the ranch house was the most beautiful thing Margaret had seen in months. There was a real wood stove radiating heat, comfortable furniture, rugs on the floor, and the smell, the smell of fresh-baked bread and stew simmering made Margaret's mouth water. Mrs. Reynolds immediately went into action like a general commanding troops. She sent one ranch hand to prepare the small cabin near the house. She sent another to heat water for baths. She sat the children down at the large kitchen table and started ladling out bowls of thick beef stew with chunks of real vegetables. "Now you eat slowly," she warned the children. "I know you're hungry, but if you eat too fast after going without, you'll get sick. Small bites, chew well." Margaret sat at the table too at Mrs. Reynolds' insistence. The older woman moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, cutting thick slices of bread, pouring milk for the children, making sure everyone had enough. "Martha, I'm going to show Margaret the cabin," Mr. Reynolds said from the doorway. "Hayes, you come too. We need to discuss arrangements." Margaret started to rise, but Mrs. Reynolds pushed her gently back down. "You stay here with your children, eat. Henry just wants to talk business with Robert. You'll see the cabin soon enough." Once the men were gone, Mrs. Reynolds sat down across from Margaret. "Now tell me your story, dear, all of it. Don't leave anything out." And so Margaret told her everything. About Thomas's death, about trying to manage the farm alone, about watching her children waste away, about the desperate decision to give them up. Mrs. Reynolds listened to it all, occasionally reaching across the table to pat Margaret's hand. When the story was done, Mrs. Reynolds had tears in her eyes. "You're one of the bravest women I've ever met," she said. "Don't you ever think otherwise. What you did, asking that stranger to save your children, that took more courage than most people have in their whole lives." "I felt like a failure," Margaret admitted, "like I was abandoning them." "No, you were saving them. There's a difference." Mrs. Reynolds squeezed her hand. "And now you're here and you're safe and you're going to build a new life. I'll help you every step of the way." Rose had fallen asleep in her chair, her face still smeared with stew. Beth was yawning widely, and even Timothy's eyes were drooping despite his efforts to stay awake. "Come on," Mrs. Reynolds said gently. "Let's get these little ones bathed and into bed. Robert and Henry will have your cabin ready by now." The cabin was small but clean and sturdy. One main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom off to the side, and a loft above accessed by a ladder. Simple furniture, but good quality. Clean blankets and pillows. A table with 4 chairs. A real stove for cooking. "It's not much," Mr. Reynolds said, watching Margaret's reaction. "It's perfect," Margaret breathed. "It's absolutely perfect." Mrs. Reynolds helped bathe the children in a large washtub they brought in. Rose splashed happily, finally warm and full and safe. Beth chattered about the pretty house and the nice lady. Timothy tried to stay awake but kept nodding off even in the bath. By the time all 3 children were clean, dressed in borrowed nightshirts, and tucked into the big bed in the bedroom, they were fast asleep. Margaret stood in the doorway watching them, hardly able to believe this was real. "You should get some rest too," Robert said quietly. He'd been helping Mr. Reynolds set up the cabin but had stayed in the background, letting the Reynolds take charge. "I don't think I can sleep," Margaret admitted. "I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this was all a dream." "It's not a dream." Robert smiled at her. "You made it. You're here. You're safe. Because of you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "If you hadn't stopped at my farm, if you hadn't offered to help, we would have died. All of us, but I did stop. And you didn't die. You survived, and now you're going to thrive." Robert put his hat back on. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. Mrs. Reynolds will want to show you the kitchen, teach." The sun was barely touching the horizon when Robert knocked on the cabin door. Margaret had been awake for hours, unable to sleep from a mixture of anxiety and excitement. She had packed their few belongings into 2 small bags. It wasn't much. Some clothes, a photo of Thomas, her mother's Bible, and a wooden horse that Thomas had carved for Timothy. Everything else she left behind. Ready? Robert asked when she opened the door. Margaret looked around the cabin one last time. This had been her home for 4 years. This was where she'd laughed with Thomas, where her children had been born, where she'd dreamed of a future that now seemed like it belonged to a different person entirely. Saying goodbye felt strange. Part of her felt like she was betraying Thomas's memory by leaving. But another part, the stronger part, knew that Thomas would want his children to live. "I'm ready," she said firmly. Robert had worked some kind of magic with his supply wagon. He'd arranged blankets in his bedroll to create a soft nest in the back. "For the little ones," he explained. "The journey's rough and I don't want them getting bounced around too much." Timothy stood tall, trying to be brave. "I can walk, Mama. I'm strong enough." "I know you are, sweetheart," Margaret said, running her hand through his hair. "But it's a long way and we need you strong when we get there. You'll have plenty of work to do at the ranch." Rose was still half asleep as Margaret settled her into the wagon nest. Beth climbed in eagerly, excited about the adventure. Timothy reluctantly joined his sisters after Robert assured him that real men knew when to rest up for the hard work ahead. The first day was harder than Margaret expected. She walked alongside the wagon, refusing Robert's offer to let her ride. She felt she needed to earn this help somehow, and walking seemed like the least she could do. Besides, Robert needed to ride his horse to scout ahead and make sure the path was safe. By midday, Margaret's legs were shaking. She hadn't eaten properly in months, and the physical strain was almost too much. She tried to hide it, but Robert noticed. He always seemed to notice everything. "Margaret," he called, pulling his horse alongside her. "You're going to collapse if you keep this up." "Get in the wagon." "I'm fine," she insisted, though she was anything but fine. "No, you're not. And I need you healthy, not passed out in the snow." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Your children need you. That means you need to take care of yourself. Now get in the wagon. That's an order, not a request." Too tired to argue, Margaret climbed into the back with her children. Rose immediately crawled into her lap, and Beth snuggled against her side. Even Timothy moved closer. Within minutes, exhausted from the stress and worry of the past months, Margaret fell asleep. She woke to find it was late afternoon. The wagon had stopped, and she could hear Robert's voice talking softly nearby. She sat up carefully, not wanting to wake the children who were still sleeping peacefully. Robert was crouched by a small fire, cooking something that smelled absolutely wonderful. "Good, you're awake," he said when he noticed her. "How do you feel?" "Better," Margaret admitted, climbing out of the wagon. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sleep so long. Don't apologize. You needed rest." He stirred whatever was in the pot. "I shot a rabbit earlier. Figured we could use some hot stew. There's a stream about 50 yards that way if you want to freshen up." The cold water on her face felt amazing. When Margaret returned, the children were awake and gathered around the fire, watching Robert with curious eyes. He was showing Timothy how to properly gut and clean the rabbit he'd caught for dinner. "See, you make the cut here real careful like," Robert explained patiently. "You don't want to pierce the innards or it'll spoil the meat." "Your papa never taught you hunting?" Timothy shook his head. "Papa was a farmer, not a hunter. He said hunting was too dangerous." "Well, farming's important too," Robert said. "But out here a man needs to know how to do both. If you want, I can teach you some things on this trip." Timothy's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd teach me?" "Sure. A boy your age should know these things." Robert smiled at him. "You'll be the man of your family someday. Best to learn now." Margaret watched this exchange with a lump in her throat. Timothy hadn't smiled like that with such genuine joy since before Thomas died. The boy needed a man's guidance, something she couldn't give him no matter how hard she tried. That evening's rabbit stew was the best meal they'd had in months. Beth declared it was better than anything Mama had ever made, which made everyone laugh. Even Margaret laughed, and it felt strange, like she'd forgotten how. As night fell and the children settled into the wagon to sleep, Robert and Margaret sat by the fire. The silence between them was comfortable, which surprised her. She wasn't usually comfortable around strangers, especially men. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said quietly. "Ask away." "Why are you really doing this? And please don't say it's just because Mrs. Reynolds needs kitchen help. There's more to it, isn't there?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "You're right. There is more to it." He poked at the fire with a stick. "When Caroline and Anna died, something in me broke. I stopped caring about much of anything. I worked, ate, slept, and that was it. I didn't make friends. Didn't let anyone get close. Figured if I didn't care about anything, nothing could hurt me again. That sounds lonely, Margaret said softly. It was. It is. Robert looked up at the stars. But you know what's worse than being hurt? Being numb, feeling nothing at all. That's a different kind of death, and I've been dying that death for 5 years now. And you think helping us will change that? Maybe, I don't know. He smiled sadly. But when I saw you yesterday, when I saw your children, something woke up inside me. Something I thought was dead. It hurt, but it was a good hurt, if that makes any sense. It meant I could still feel something. Margaret understood exactly what he meant. After Thomas died, I felt numb too. The only thing that kept me going was the children. They needed me, so I had to keep moving. But inside, I was just empty. And now? Robert asked. Now I'm terrified, Margaret admitted with a small laugh, but also hopeful. And hope is better than numbness, even if it comes with fear. They talked long into the night, sharing stories about their lost spouses, about happier times, about dreams they'd once had. Margaret learned that Robert had wanted to own his own ranch someday, that he loved horses more than almost anything, that his favorite meal was his mother's apple pie, which he hadn't tasted in 10 years since she passed. Robert learned that Margaret had been a schoolteacher before she married Thomas, that she missed teaching terribly, that she could speak 3 languages and had once dreamed of traveling the world, that she secretly wrote poetry but had never shown it to anyone. The second day of travel was easier. Margaret felt stronger after a good night's sleep and a full meal. Timothy walked alongside Robert's horse for part of the day, asking endless questions about ranching, cattle, horses, and everything else. Robert answered each question with patience, never making the boy feel foolish for not knowing things. Beth found a collection of pretty rocks and insisted on keeping them all. Robert fashioned a small pouch for her from a scrap of leather, and she wore it proudly around her neck. Little Rose mostly slept in the wagon, but when she was awake, she watched Robert with big, curious eyes. That afternoon, they stopped by a creek to let the animals drink and rest. While the children played in the shallow water, carefully supervised by Margaret, Robert checked the wagon wheel that had been making a strange noise. Is something wrong? Margaret asked, noticing his frown. The wheel's cracking. Not terrible yet, but it could become a problem. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. We'll need to take it slow. Maybe stop earlier tonight to give it rest. As if to prove his point, the wheel made a loud creaking sound. Timothy looked worried. Will we make it to the ranch? We'll make it, Robert assured him. Might just take an extra day, that's all. No cause for worry. But that night, things got worse. The temperature dropped dramatically and snow began to fall heavily. Robert quickly set up a makeshift shelter using a tarp stretched between the wagon and some trees. They huddled together for warmth, the children pressed between Margaret and Robert, the fire barely keeping the bitter cold at bay. Will we freeze? Beth asked in a small voice. No, sweetheart, Margaret said, pulling her closer. We're going to be just fine. Your mama's right, Robert added. I've been through worse storms than this. We just need to stay together and keep warm. Tell you what, how about I tell you a story to pass the time? And so Robert told stories, funny stories about ranch life, about ornery cattle and stubborn horses, adventure stories about close calls with wolves and narrow escapes from stampedes. His voice was soothing, and one by one the children drifted off to sleep despite the cold and wind. When they were all asleep, Margaret whispered, "Thank you. For everything. For saving us. For being kind. For making this bearable." You're stronger than you think, Robert replied quietly. You would have found a way to save them even without me. I don't think so. I was at the end of my rope, but you didn't give up. You were willing to do the hardest thing a mother could do. That takes incredible strength. He adjusted the blanket around Rose. These are good kids. You've raised them well. Thomas raised them well. I'm just trying not to mess it up. Summer arrived at the Double R Ranch with blazing heat and long days. Timothy's arm had healed well, though Martha insisted he take it easy for a few more weeks. The boy had learned his lesson and was more cautious now, but no less eager to learn ranching from Robert. Margaret and Robert's relationship had settled into something comfortable and sweet. They didn't rush. They didn't make grand declarations. They simply enjoyed each other's company, let their connection deepen naturally. and allowed the children to grow accustomed to Robert's constant presence in their lives. Rose had started calling him Papa Robert, which made him tear up the first time he heard it. Beth declared that Robert was her best friend, after Biscuit the dog, of course, and Timothy looked up to him with the kind of hero worship that only an 8-year-old boy could manage. Margaret found herself humming while she worked, smiling for no reason, feeling lighter than she had in over a year. Martha teased her about being in love, and Margaret no longer denied it. She was in love. Terrified, but in love. It was on a hot Tuesday in July when everything changed. Margaret was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Danny came running in, his face pale. "Mrs. Chen, there's a man here asking for you. Says he's family." Margaret's hand stilled. Family? She had no family left. Thomas's parents were dead, and his siblings had never bothered to stay in touch. A cold dread settled in her stomach. "What's his name?" "William Chen. Says he's your late husband's brother." The bowl Margaret was holding slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor. William, Thomas's younger brother. She'd met him once, years ago, at their wedding. He'd been cold and disapproving, making snide comments about Thomas marrying beneath himself. They'd had no contact since. "Margaret, are you all right?" Martha asked, noticing her sudden pallor. "I need to see what he wants," Margaret said, her voice shaking. She untied her apron with trembling hands and walked to the front of the house. William Chen stood on the porch, tall and thin, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place on a working ranch. His face was sharp, his eyes cold. He looked at Margaret with undisguised disdain. "Margaret," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "you're looking well. Better than I expected for a woman who abandoned her home." "I didn't abandon anything," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady. "I was starving. My children were starving. I did what I had to do to save them." "By running off to work as a servant?" William sneered. "By dragging Thomas's children into this common life? Do you have any idea how this reflects on our family name?" "Your family name?" Margaret's fear was quickly being replaced by anger. "Where was your precious family when Thomas died? Where were you when we were freezing and starving? I wrote to your family. I begged for help. No one responded. We didn't receive any letter," William said dismissively. "But that's beside the point. I'm here now to rectify this situation. I'm taking the children back east with me. They'll be raised properly, educated properly, in a home befitting their station." Margaret felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. "You're not taking my children anywhere. I'm their legal guardian now that Thomas is dead. As the eldest male relative, I have rights. You're an unfit mother who couldn't even keep a roof over their heads. I kept them alive." Margaret's voice rose. "I kept them safe when you and your family did nothing." The commotion had drawn attention. Henry Reynolds came out onto the porch, his face stern. "What's going on here?" "And who are you?" William asked rudely. "I'm Henry Reynolds. I own this ranch. And you're on my property making threats to one of my employees." "This is a family matter," William said coldly. "It doesn't concern you." "Anything that concerns Mrs. Chen concerns me. She's under my protection here." Henry crossed his arms. "Now state your business properly or leave." William's eyes narrowed. "I'm here to collect my brother's children. Their mother has proven herself incapable of caring for them. I have every legal right to take custody." Margaret felt panic rising in her chest. "You can't do this. You can't just take them from me." "Actually, I can." William pulled some papers from his jacket. "I've already filed the necessary documents back east. The court has granted me temporary custody pending a hearing. I'm authorized to take the children immediately." "Those papers mean nothing out here," Henry said firmly. "They mean everything everywhere," William corrected. "The law is the law, Mr. Reynolds. If you interfere, you'll be guilty of kidnapping." Margaret's world was spinning. This couldn't be happening, not now, not when they'd finally found safety and happiness. "William, please. The children are thriving here. They're healthy and happy. Don't do this. They're living in a servant's cabin on a cattle ranch. That's not thriving, that's surviving. They deserve better." William's voice was hard. "They deserve to be raised in society, not in the dirt with cowboys and cattle. They deserve to be with their mother," Margaret cried out. "Then come with us," William said. "Return to Boston. Live in my home where I can ensure you're raising them properly. Under my guidance and supervision, of course. You'll want for nothing." The way he said it made Margaret's skin crawl. She'd be a prisoner, dependent on his charity. watched and controlled. And if I refuse, then I take the children anyway. You can fight it in court if you like, but you have no money for lawyers. I, on the other hand, have considerable resources. You'll lose. Robert appeared then, having been fetched by one of the ranch hands. He took in the scene quickly, his jaw tightening when he saw Margaret's distressed face. What's going on? Who is this? William asked with disdain. Robert Hayes. I work here at the ranch. Ah, the cowboy. William's tone dripped with contempt. Tell me, cowboy, are you involved with my brother's widow? Is that what's happening here? That's none of your business, Robert said evenly. But his hands were clenched into fists. It's entirely my business when it concerns the moral environment my nephew and nieces are being raised in. William turned back to Margaret. Is this why you're so resistant? You've taken up with this ranch hand? How quickly you've forgotten my brother. Don't you dare, Margaret said, her voice shaking with fury. Don't you dare speak about Thomas or about what I've been through. You know nothing. You cared nothing about him when he was alive. You didn't even come to his funeral. I was dealing with business matters. Not all of us can drop everything at a moment's notice. William straightened his jacket. Enough of this. Where are the children? I'll be taking them now. Over my dead body, Margaret said. That can be arranged, William replied coldly. I can have you declared mentally unfit. A woman who is willing to give away her children to strangers? That shows poor judgment at best, insanity at worst. Robert stepped forward, his voice deadly calm. You need to leave now. Or what? You'll attack me? Go ahead. That will only prove my point about the violent, unsuitable environment these children are being raised in. William smiled cruelly. I've already won, Mrs. Chen. The only question is whether you come quietly or whether this becomes ugly. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. This couldn't be happening. After everything they'd been through, after finally finding happiness, this man was going to rip her family apart. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. Now pack their things. I'll return tomorrow with a proper carriage. William turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Chen? If you run, I'll have the law after you for kidnapping. There's nowhere you can hide that I won't find you. My family has connections everywhere. After he left, Margaret collapsed onto the porch steps, her whole body shaking. Robert sat beside her, pulling her close. We'll fight this. We'll find a way. How? Margaret sobbed. He's right. I have no money, no lawyer, no legal standing. He's family. The courts will side with him. Henry was pacing, his face thoughtful. There might be a way. Martha? He called into the house. Martha, get out here! Martha emerged, took one look at Margaret's face, and immediately went to her. What happened? What's wrong? Henry explained quickly. Martha's face grew stormy. That pompous, heartless snake. He can't do this. Actually, he probably can, Henry said grimly. Unless we get creative. Margaret, how do you feel about getting married? Everyone stared at him. What? Margaret asked. If you're married, your husband becomes the children's legal guardian, not your brother-in-law. William would have no claim. Henry looked at Robert. Hayes, you've been courting this woman for months now. You planning on making it official anytime soon? Robert's eyes widened. We haven't. I would, but nothing. You love her, don't you? Henry pressed. Yes, but. And you love those children? Of course I do, but marriage shouldn't be what? A solution to a problem? Son, half the marriages in this world started as solutions to problems. Henry looked between them. I'm not saying it's romantic. I'm saying it's practical. And it might be the only way to keep this family together. Margaret's head was spinning. Marriage. To Robert. She'd thought about it, dreamed about it even, but not like this. Not rushed and desperate and forced by circumstances. Robert, you don't have to. Stop, Robert said, taking her hands in his. If I do this, it won't be because I have to. It'll be because I want to. Because I've wanted to for months now but was too scared to ask. This isn't how I imagined proposing, but the feelings are real. Margaret woke before dawn, momentarily confused about where she was. Then she heard the soft breathing of her children and remembered. The ranch, safety, a new beginning. She rose quietly, careful not to wake them, and stoked the fire that had burned low during the night. There was a gentle knock at the door just as the sun started to peek over the horizon. Mrs. Reynolds stood there with a basket, covered with a cloth. Good morning, dear. Thought you might need some breakfast supplies until you get on your feet. She came in and set the basket on the table. Fresh eggs, bacon, some of yesterday's bread, and milk for the little ones. Mrs. Reynolds. I don't know how to thank you, Margaret began. But the older woman waved her off. Call me Martha. Please, Mrs. Reynolds makes me feel ancient. She smiled warmly. And you can thank me by getting yourself and those babies fed, then meeting me in the main kitchen in about an hour. Time to learn the ropes. The kitchen in the main house was enormous compared to what Margaret was used to. 2 large wood stoves, a massive table for food preparation, shelves lined with pots and pans, and a pantry that looked like it could feed an army. Which Margaret supposed it did. We serve breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, and dinner at 6 in the evening, Martha explained, showing Margaret around. The ranch hands eat in the bunkhouse dining hall, but we prepare everything here and cart it over. 30 men with big appetites, so we cook in quantity. Margaret watched as Martha moved through her routine with the ease of long practice, making biscuits by the dozen, frying bacon in huge skillets, scrambling what must have been 3 dozen eggs. The work was constant and demanding, but Margaret felt a spark of excitement. This she could do. This she knew how to do. Tomorrow you'll start helping with the actual cooking, Martha said. Today just watch and learn the routine. Oh, and don't you worry about your children. They can play in the yard where we can see them through the window. The ranch hands all know to watch out for them. And so Margaret's new life began. The work was hard, much harder than anything she'd done on the farm. The hours were long. Her feet ached and her back hurt by the end of each day. But for the first time in months, Margaret felt useful. She felt capable. She felt like she was earning the safety and security her children now had. The children thrived in ways that made Margaret's heart sing. Within 2 weeks, color had returned to their cheeks. They'd gained weight. They laughed and played like normal children again. Rose, who had been so weak and quiet, now ran around the yard chasing chickens and giggling. Beth made friends with Martha's old dog, a gentle hound named Biscuit who followed her everywhere. And Timothy, he absolutely bloomed. Robert had taken the boy under his wing, teaching him ranch skills every evening after the day's work was done. Margaret would watch from the kitchen window as Robert showed Timothy how to rope a fence post, how to curry a horse properly, how to mend a saddle. The boy followed Robert around like a shadow, soaking up every word, every lesson. He's good with the boy, Martha commented one day, noticing Margaret watching. Robert hasn't taken to anyone like that since he lost his own family. It's good for both of them. Margaret had to agree. Timothy needed a man's guidance, and Robert seemed to come alive when he was teaching. The sad, distant look that sometimes crossed his face appeared less and less often. The ranch hands were kind too in their rough way. They teased Beth gently, calling her little boss because she liked to give them orders about how to pet Biscuit properly. They carved small toys for Rose, and they treated Margaret with respectful courtesy, never making her feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. Margaret proved herself in the kitchen quickly. Her cooking, once she had proper ingredients and equipment, was excellent. The ranch hands started complimenting the meals. Martha praised her efficiency and creativity. Even Mr. Reynolds, who Margaret had worried might send them away after the trial month, nodded approvingly one day. You've earned your place here, Mrs. Chen, he said gruffly. If you want to stay permanent, the job's yours. Margaret's relief was so profound she had to sit down. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, thank you so much. Call me Henry, he said with a small smile. And you've earned it. You work hard, you don't complain, and the men are eating better than they have in years. Martha's very pleased. As the weeks turned into months, Margaret found herself settling into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, get the children dressed and fed, work in the kitchen until late afternoon, spend evenings with her children, fall into bed exhausted but satisfied. It was a good life, a stable life, and Margaret was grateful for it. But something else was happening too, something she hadn't expected and wasn't quite sure how to handle. Robert had started coming by their cabin in the evenings, ostensibly to check on them or to work with Timothy. But he'd linger after Timothy went to bed, sitting by the fire and talking with Margaret while she mended clothes or prepared things for the next day. They talked about everything. Books they'd read, places they'd like to see someday, memories of their lost spouses, dreams for the future. Margaret found herself looking forward to these evening visits more than she wanted to admit. Robert's presence was comforting. His voice soothed something restless in her soul. One evening in early spring, About 3 months after they had arrived at the ranch, Margaret was outside hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the direction of the horse corral. Her heart jumped into her throat. That sounded like Timothy. She ran toward the sound and found Robert holding Timothy back from a large stallion that was rearing and kicking inside the corral. Her son was crying not from fear but from frustration. "I can do it. Let me try again." Timothy was yelling. "Not until you're ready," Robert said firmly, his arm still holding the boy back. "That horse is too much for you right now." "What happened?" Margaret demanded, rushing over. Robert turned to her and she saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Timothy tried to ride Thunder. The horse spooked and nearly threw him into the fence. He could have been seriously hurt." Margaret's fear turned instantly to anger. "Timothy! What were you thinking? You could have been killed." "I wanted to prove I could do it," Timothy said, tears streaming down his face. "All the other ranch hands ride the difficult horses. I wanted to show I could too." "You're 8 years old." Margaret's voice rose. "You're not a ranch hand, you're a child." "I'm the man of our family," Timothy shouted back. "Papa's dead and I have to take care of everyone now." The words hung in the air like a slap. Margaret felt her anger drain away, replaced by heartache. Her baby boy had been carrying this burden, this belief that he had to replace his father, and she hadn't even realized it. Robert knelt down in front of Timothy, his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me, son. You're not the man of your family. You're the boy of your family, and that's exactly what you should be. But Papa said, I know what your papa probably said, that you needed to be strong and brave and take care of your mother and sisters. And you have been. You've been so strong and so brave. But that doesn't mean you have to be a man already. You're allowed to still be a kid." Timothy's face crumpled. "But who's going to take care of Mama if I don't?" Robert glanced at Margaret and something passed between them. An understanding. A shared feeling neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. "Your Mama's got people looking out for her now," Robert said gently. "Me, Martha, Henry, all the ranch hands. She's not alone anymore, and neither are you. So you don't have to grow up so fast. You can take your time and learn things properly at your own pace." Timothy threw his arms around Robert's neck and sobbed. Margaret watched as Robert held her son, saw the tenderness in his face, the way he gently patted Timothy's back and murmured soothing words. Her vision blurred with tears. After Timothy had cried himself out and gone inside to wash his face, Margaret stayed outside with Robert. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving him, for understanding what he needed to hear." "I know what it's like to feel like you have to be strong all the time," Robert said. "To feel like you can't show weakness or fear. It's a heavy burden, especially for a boy his age." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Then Robert spoke again, his voice soft and uncertain. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. I've been wanting to say it for weeks now, but I haven't known how." Margaret's heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "When I brought you here, it was supposed to be just helping someone in need. I wasn't looking for anything more than that." He turned to face her. "But somewhere along the way, things changed. You changed things. Your children changed things." "Robert," Margaret started, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish, please. I'm not good at this." He took a deep breath. "I came back to life because of you. All of you. For 5 years I was just existing, going through the motions. But now I wake up in the morning and I have a reason to. I look forward to teaching Timothy new things. I look forward to Beth showing me her rock collection. I look forward to Rose calling me Wobert because she can't say her R's yet." He paused, his eyes meeting Margaret's. "And most of all, I look forward to sitting by your fire in the evenings, talking with you, hearing about your day. You've become my friend, Margaret. Maybe more than a friend, and I needed you to know that." The morning of her wedding, Margaret woke before dawn with butterflies dancing in her stomach. Her first wedding had been planned for months, a proper church ceremony with family and friends. This one was being thrown together in desperate haste with a borrowed dress and whatever flowers Martha could gather from her garden. Yet somehow this felt more real, more meaningful. Martha came to help her get ready, bringing a beautiful blue dress that she'd worn to her own daughter's wedding years ago. "Something borrowed," she said with a wink. "It'll fit you better than your work dress, at least." The dress was lovely, simple but elegant, and it fit Margaret almost perfectly. Martha pinned up her hair and wove small white flowers through the dark strands. "There now," she said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look beautiful, dear." Margaret stared at her reflection in the small mirror. She did look different. Not like the desperate, starving widow who'd arrived at this ranch 7 months ago. She looked healthy, hopeful, happy even despite the circumstances forcing this rushed ceremony. "Are you nervous?" Martha asked gently. "Terrified," Margaret admitted. "Not about marrying Robert. About everything else. What if this doesn't work? What if William finds a way to take the children anyway? Then we fight harder," Martha said firmly. "But that man will have to go through all of us to get to those babies. Henry's already talked to the other ranch owners in the area. We're all ready to testify about what a good mother you are, how well the children are doing. William Chen might have money and connections back east, but out here, we take care of our own." The ceremony was held in the front room of the ranch house at 8 in the morning. The circuit judge had arrived at dawn, grumbling about being dragged out so early but willing to perform the service quickly. Margaret's children stood in front, all dressed in their Sunday best. Timothy looked serious and grown up in his clean shirt. Beth couldn't stop fidgeting with excitement. Rose kept trying to give Margaret more flowers, insisting that brides needed lots and lots. Robert stood at the front of the room in his best clothes, looking nervous and handsome and so earnest that Margaret's heart swelled. When she walked toward him, his face lit up with such pure joy that any lingering doubts she had melted away. The ceremony was simple and quick. They exchanged vows that the judge recited from memory. Robert's hands shook slightly as he slipped a simple gold band on Margaret's finger. It had belonged to his mother, Martha whispered later, the only thing of value he owned. "You may kiss your bride," the judge said, and Robert leaned in carefully, pressing a gentle kiss to Margaret's lips. It was brief and chaste with all those watching eyes, but it held a promise of more to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Robert Hayes." The small gathering erupted in applause. Beth was jumping up and down with excitement. Timothy was grinning despite trying to look mature. Rose was clapping her chubby hands together, not fully understanding but caught up in the happiness around her. Martha had prepared a simple but lovely wedding breakfast. As they all sat around the large table eating and talking, Margaret felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the hot coffee. This was her family now, not just her children, but Robert and Martha and Henry, and all the ranch hands who'd become like brothers. She belonged here. They were just finishing breakfast when they heard it, the sound of a carriage approaching. Everyone fell silent. "That'll be William," Henry said grimly, "right on time." "Everyone remember what we discussed." William Chen strode into the house without knocking, his face set in stern lines. "Mrs. Chen, I trust you've had time to consider." He stopped, taking in the scene. The remains of the celebration. The flowers. Margaret's nice dress. "What's this?" "A wedding breakfast," Margaret said, standing up and moving to Robert's side. "We were married this morning." William's face flushed with anger. "You did what?" "I married Robert Hayes. The children now have a father, which means you have no claim on them." Margaret's voice was steady, though her heart was pounding. "This is ridiculous. A sham marriage designed to thwart legal custody?" William sputtered. "No court will recognize this." "Actually, they will." The judge spoke up from his seat at the table. "I'm Judge Harrison. I performed the ceremony myself and filed the papers immediately. It's completely legal and binding." William's eyes narrowed. "How convenient. And how much did they pay you to rush this through?" "Watch your accusations, Mr. Chen," Judge Harrison said sternly. "I don't take kindly to having my integrity questioned. This is a legitimate marriage between two people who have been courting for months. Every ranch hand here can testify to that." The ranch hands nodded in agreement. One of them, an older cowboy named Frank, spoke up. "Been watching Hayes Moon over Mrs. Chen since spring. About time he made an honest woman of her." Margaret blushed, but she didn't contradict him. It was close enough to the truth. William looked around the room, seeing the unified front against him. "This isn't over," he said coldly. "I'll fight this. I'll prove it's a sham marriage. I'll get those children yet." "On what grounds?" Henry asked calmly. "The children are healthy, well-fed, well-educated. Their mother is employed and married. They have a stable home. What exactly are you going to tell a judge?" "That their mother was ready to give them away to strangers," William shot back. "That shows profound unfitness as a parent. That shows a mother willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to save her children's lives," Judge Harrison corrected. Any reasonable person would see it that way, and I'll be happy to testify to that effect if needed. William's face was turning red. You're all against me. This whole town is corrupt. This whole town cares about children, Martha said sharply, which is more than I can say for you. Where were you when they were starving? Where were you when Margaret wrote begging for help? You didn't care about these children until there was something to be gained by taking them. How dare you? No, how dare you? Martha continued, her voice rising. You swan in here with your fancy suit and your legal papers, acting like you're doing some kind of favor. But we all know what this is really about. Control, money, whatever inheritance Thomas left. Well, you can't have it. You can't have them. William opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around the room one more time, seeing only hostile faces. Finally, he straightened his jacket. This isn't over, he repeated. I'll be back with my lawyer. We'll see what a real court has to say about this farce. You do that, Henry said calmly, and we'll see you in court. We've got Judge Harrison, plus testimony from everyone here about what good parents the Hayes are. What do you have? Money and self-righteousness? Good luck with that. After William stormed out, slamming the door behind him, there was a moment of tense silence. Then Timothy spoke up from where he'd been watching everything with wide eyes. Is that man really going to take us away? Robert knelt down in front of the boy. Not if I have anything to say about it. You're my son now, legally and officially, and nobody takes my family from me. Promise? Timothy's voice was small. I promise. I'll fight for you with everything I have. Robert pulled the boy into a hug, and Margaret saw tears in both their eyes. Over the next few weeks, they waited for William to make good on his threats. Margaret jumped every time she heard a horse approaching, convinced it was William returning with legal papers and law enforcement. But days turned into weeks and he didn't come back. Finally, a letter arrived. Not from William, but from a lawyer back east. Margaret's hands shook as she opened it, with Robert reading over her shoulder. The letter explained that after reviewing the case, William's lawyer had advised him that he had no legal standing to pursue custody. Margaret was a fit mother, now married with a stable home. The children were clearly thriving. Any attempt to remove them would be seen as vindictive rather than in the children's best interest. William had agreed to drop his claim, though the letter made it clear he wasn't happy about it. It's over, Margaret whispered, hardly daring to believe it. He's giving up. Robert let out a whoop of joy and picked Margaret up, spinning her around. We won! The family stays together! The children came running at the commotion, and soon they were all hugging and laughing and crying happy tears. They'd survived another crisis. They'd protected what mattered most. That night, after the children were asleep, Margaret and Robert sat on their porch steps looking at the stars, just as they had so many times before. But everything was different now. They were husband and wife. A real family. Are you happy? Robert asked softly. I know this isn't how you imagined your life turning out. Margaret thought about it. A year ago, she'd been married to Thomas, farming their little homestead, dreaming of a quiet, simple life. That life was gone, ended by sickness and winter and desperation. But in its place, she'd found this. A new love, a new home, a new life that was richer and fuller than she could have imagined. I'm happy, she said honestly. It's different than I expected. But different doesn't mean worse. Sometimes it means better. I never thought I'd be happy again after losing Caroline and Anna, Robert admitted. I thought that part of my life was over. But you showed me I was wrong. You and your children gave me back my life. We saved each other, Margaret said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Spring brought warmth and new life to the Double R Ranch. The meadows filled with wildflowers. The cattle grew fat on fresh grass. And Margaret's children bloomed like the flowers around them. It had been 4 months since that desperate winter day, when she'd begged a stranger to save her family, and the transformation in all their lives was remarkable. Margaret had saved enough wages to buy the children new clothes. Not hand-me-downs, but actual new clothes that fit properly. Watching Beth twirl in her new dress, squealing with delight, made all the long hours in the hot kitchen worthwhile. Robert's visits to their cabin had become a nightly ritual. He'd arrive after supper, usually with some excuse about checking the cabin's roof or asking Margaret's opinion on something ranch-related, but they both knew the truth. They were drawn to each other in ways neither fully understood yet but couldn't deny. One evening, Margaret was sitting outside the cabin mending clothes while Robert helped Timothy with his reading homework. Beth was playing with Biscuit, and Rose was picking dandelions, bringing each one to Margaret like a precious treasure. "Mama, look, pretty," Rose exclaimed, holding up a particularly fluffy dandelion. "Beautiful, sweetheart," Margaret said, accepting the flower. She glanced up and caught Robert watching her with such tenderness in his eyes that her breath caught. When he realized she'd noticed, he looked away quickly, a slight blush coloring his weathered cheeks. Martha had noticed too. "Something's brewing between you two," she'd told Margaret just that morning. "And don't you deny it." "I've got eyes." "Nothing's brewing," Margaret had protested, though even she didn't believe her own words. "We're just friends." "Uh-huh. And I'm the Queen of England." Martha had laughed. "Listen, dear, there's no shame in finding happiness again. Life's too short and too hard to turn away from love when it comes knocking." "It's too soon," Margaret had whispered. "Thomas has only been gone for 10 months. "There's no rule book for grief," Martha had said gently. "Your heart will tell you when it's ready. Just don't let fear stop you from living." Now, watching Robert patiently sound out words with Timothy, seeing how natural he was with her children, Margaret wondered if maybe Martha was right. Maybe it was okay to feel what she was feeling. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of a horse galloping up to the cabin. One of the ranch hands, a young man named Danny, practically fell off his mount in his hurry. "Mrs. Chen. Robert, there's been an accident on the north pasture." Robert was on his feet instantly. "What happened?" "Cattle drive went wrong. One of the steers went crazy, and Timothy got caught in the stampede." Margaret's world tilted. "What?" "Timothy's right here." She turned, but the spot where Timothy had been sitting was empty. The reading book lay abandoned on the ground. "He must have snuck off to watch the drive," Robert said, already running for his horse. "Danny, take me there now." "I'm coming with you," Margaret said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Mrs. Chen, you should stay with the girls." "That's my son." "I'm coming." The ride to the north pasture was the longest of Margaret's life. Danny led them at a breakneck pace, and Margaret clung to the saddle, praying with every breath. "Please let him be okay. Please, God, don't take him from me, not now. Not when we've finally found safety." They found the scene of chaos. Cattle milling around nervously, ranch hands trying to restore order, and in the center of it all a small figure lying on the ground with Henry Reynolds kneeling beside him. Margaret was off her horse before it fully stopped, running to her son. "Timothy!" The boy was conscious, thank God, but his face was pale and his left arm was bent at an odd angle. When he saw his mother, his brave facade crumbled and he started crying. "Mama, I'm sorry. I just wanted to watch. I didn't mean to." "It's okay, baby. It's okay." Margaret knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she assessed his injuries. Broken arm, definitely. Possibly some bruised ribs. But alive. He was alive. "We need to get him back to the house," Henry said. "Martha will know what to do until we can get the doctor out here." Robert appeared with a makeshift stretcher he'd fashioned from a blanket and 2 fence posts. "Careful now," he said as they gently lifted Timothy onto it. But Margaret saw his hands shaking, saw the fear in his eyes that he was trying to hide. Back at the ranch house, Martha took charge. She'd set bones before and knew what to do. Timothy screamed when she straightened his arm, and Margaret had to leave the room, unable to bear her child's pain. She stood outside, tears streaming down her face, feeling like she was going to be sick. Robert found her there, leaning against the wall, shaking. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms. Margaret collapsed against him, finally letting herself fall apart. All the fear, all the terror of almost losing her son came pouring out in racking sobs. "He's okay," Robert murmured, holding her tight. "He's going to be okay. Kids are tough. He'll heal." "I almost lost him," Margaret choked out. "I thought I'd already lost everything I could lose, but I almost lost him today." "But you didn't. He's alive." "He's going to be fine." Robert's voice was rough with emotion. "Martha's setting the bone now. In a few weeks he'll be running around like nothing happened." Margaret pulled back enough to look up at Robert's face, and what she saw there made her heart skip. His eyes were wet with unshed tears. His jaw was clenched tight. He looked devastated. "You were terrified too," she said softly. "Of course I was terrified." Robert's voice broke. "When Danny said Timothy was hurt, I felt like I was dying. All I could think was that I couldn't lose him. I couldn't lose any of you. You've become—" He paused, struggling with the words. "You've become my family. Somewhere along the way, without me even realizing it, You all became the most important thing in my world. Robert, Margaret whispered, her heart pounding. I love that boy like he's my own son, Robert continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd started. I love watching Beth find beauty in rocks and flowers. I love the way Rose calls me Wobert and demands piggyback rides. And you. He cupped Margaret's face in his hands. I love talking to you every evening. I love your laugh. I love how strong you are. How you've built a life here despite everything you've been through. I love you, Margaret. All of you. Margaret stared at him, hardly able to breathe. She'd known on some level that feelings were growing between them, but hearing him say it, hearing the raw emotion in his voice made it real in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm so scared of caring this much again. Of losing again. I don't think I could survive another loss. I'm scared too, Robert said. I've been scared since the day I brought you here. Scared of feeling again. Scared of hoping again. Scared of opening my heart when I know how much it hurts when you lose someone. He rested his forehead against hers. But today, when I thought Timothy might be seriously hurt or worse, I realized something. I'm already too deep to back out now. I already love you all too much. So I might as well stop fighting it. Martha's voice interrupted them from the doorway. He's asking for you both. The arms set and splinted. He'll be uncomfortable for a while, but he's going to be just fine. They found Timothy lying on the couch in the main house, his arm in a clean white splint, looking small and young and frightened. Rose was curled up next to him, patting his good arm gently. Beth sat on the floor beside them, her eyes red from crying. Mama, Timothy said when he saw Margaret. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have gone to watch the drive. I wanted to be useful. To be a real ranch hand. Margaret sat beside him and gently stroked his hair. You scared me half to death, young man. But I'm just so grateful you're okay. I scared myself too, Timothy admitted. When I saw those cattle coming at me, I thought I was going to die like Papa did. Robert knelt down beside the couch. You're not going to die, son. You're going to heal up and be good as new. But you learned an important lesson today, didn't you? That I should listen when people tell me I'm not ready for something, Timothy said quietly. That's right. There's no shame in learning things slowly, at your own pace. The ranch isn't going anywhere. You've got your whole life to become a great ranch hand. No need to rush it and get yourself killed in the process. Timothy looked at Robert with something like adoration. You're not mad at me? I was terrified for you, which is different than mad. But no, I'm not mad. Robert smiled, though you did give us all quite a scare. Your mother nearly collapsed when she heard you were hurt. Timothy looked at his mother with wide eyes. Really? Really, Margaret confirmed. You're my baby boy. Of course I was scared. I'm not a baby, Timothy protested weakly. You'll always be my baby even when you're a grown man with babies of your own, Margaret said, kissing his forehead. That's just how mothers are. That night, after the children were finally settled in their cabin and sleeping soundly, Margaret stepped outside for some air. Her nerves were still frayed from the day's events. She found Robert sitting on the porch steps staring up at the stars. Can't sleep either? She asked, sitting beside him. Too wound up, he glanced at her. I keep thinking about what could have happened. How different this night would have been if things had gone worse. I know. I keep thinking the same thing. Margaret wrapped her arms around herself against the cool night air.